Almost about 5 years ago at this point, Disney released their first major sequel to an animated property since the likes of Rescuers Down Under, only known as Ralph Breaks the Internet. A name that so wrongly missed the mark to call it Ralph Wrecks the Internet based upon the character of the same name and the first film, that it became one of the worst movies of all time and one of the worst sequels of all time. Like literally looking back on it now, we can see a movie that so much destroyed everything great about the first film, and as an extent, the case for Disney's ability to create sequels at all that they haven't been able to recover in quality ever since. And I know at this point that this movie has already been covered in extensive detail over the years since its release to point out why it's a bad movie, but I realized that I should add on to the conversation to reflect on the slow decay that the executives of this very company has caused for my loss of love at Disney that I really hate myself. This is without a doubt the worst sequel that has been ever made, and the most insanely borderline uneducated film when it comes to the internet itself and what it represents of what actually goes on there, and how it just forgets everything about itself. Yes, the characters are there, but everything else about them isn't. It's a shell of its former self in all of the wrong ways possible. It's beyond me how you manage to turn your main protagonist from the first film into the most unlikable idiots who you don't root for at all, especially the man boy that Ralph tended to be in this entire film, which is hypocritical from the end of the first, who breaks the internet rather than wrecks it, where you should have just renamed him in this film to Break It Rock instead, because it's not something you put in a title to the sequel of character whose style is completely different from Breaking. And the fact you have this film ignore Turbo in what they did in this film really highlights a level of stupidity that the writers, directors, and producers made while making this film. Like, in order for a sequel to work, you have to acknowledge the past of the character, the journey that shaped it, and if you ignore that, it tends to not work out in the end. And that's not to say every Disney sequel has been like that. Even for the most part that they are terrible, at least they still have the same personalities and story from the first, where this one just doesn't at all. But just like those films themselves, they don't really have interesting stories to tell. Sure, some might enjoy them, but they're just downright terrible, having nowhere to go for the grand conclusion that satisfied the original story. Most of these movies can be summed up as product placement for Disney itself, because when you take a look at the princess scene and the Disney scene, it all takes place in the realm of Disney on the internet, which has a big part of the film that just needed to be explored, just to remind you, if you weren't paying attention to the credits at the very beginning of this film, that this indeed is a Disney film, and why they are such a great company for doing all these things that destroyed what you loved about your childhood. It's just so great and so wonderful that they did this. Comparing and contrasting these two movies are really a night and day difference about what these films did for video games and extension the internet. How one actually respects it by showing the research it did for it, and the other shows a clear lack of understanding to how the internet works, especially including the parts about virality and making money online, where the release of this film actually coincided with the rise of TikTok just starting off, and how most viral videos will not make you the amount of money that they needed in this film to desperately fix Sugar Rush in such a short amount of time. So while the movie is as bad as it does something even more destructive in the public eye, and the kids who watch this movie are being taught something grossly dangerous and misinformed that would potentially influence how kids see the internet as is. And as time rolls on, this movie with its multiple references will only get more worse and outdated compared to like Wreck-It Ralph, for a film so focused on learning about another side of the internet. So yeah, to start off, the beginning of this film takes us place 6 years after the events of the first, keeping up with the year of their releases, establishing how Ralph and Vanellope have become such good friends, hanging out after hours and showing contrasting opinions of both characters. Ralph here is content with the life he has after the experience he had in Wreck-It Ralph, and how he had the same thoughts as we see with Vanellope, while Vanellope is longing for something more. While that is a good conflict to present, we later learn how it destroys everything about the messages presented in the first one, because this is where things start to diverge from the introduction of Wi-Fi, with the knowledge that only Sonic knows about the internet and everyone else, as an example, is in the dark of something mysterious and new that they haven't experienced before, for something that's existed for a very long time before the events of Wreck-It Ralph. Like, I really cannot believe that Mr. Litwack did not even think to have this in 2012 when the entire world was literally using the internet, especially in arcades where only Sonic somehow is the only one who knows about it. But moving back to the main point of Vanellope's constant search for something new, and how Ralph cannot handle the fact that she has a differing opinion and refuses to do anything to jeopardize his relationship with her, he goes off during game hours to her game to help her with a new track, which doesn't make any sense at all to begin with, because you are supposed to be in your game by the time the arcade opens. In this scene, he is actually going turbo again with no consequences from that point, just to retain his best friend and not learning from the finale of the first film that made him to be content as he was at the beginning of this film with his very life, just to make a track in the middle of a game being played, risking and jeopardizing again the safety of Sugar Rush and Fix-It Felix Jr. as a whole, as we will see. It's just like this sequence just ignores everything that actually happened in the first film about what happened when he disappeared, like the game was at risk of being unplugged and replaced for good, but it doesn't even acknowledge that. Instead, we see here he creates a new track, but in the process of not doing what the player wants, they inadvertently make the players break the wheel in the game. The mindset they put Ralph in is utterly ridiculous considering what is happening, where he should have just waited till after closing to do this and help her instead of being in the middle of the day while people are actively playing the game that actually usurping the player and by extent breaking the game, which we were not supposed to do if we actually learned anything from before. Like, it just doesn't make sense within the context of the film. Within the first few minutes of the film, we're already breaking the rules we established we are not supposed to do and a fact that we've learned and grown from, and this is still directed by the same people who brought us the first, so that doesn't even make any sense. It's also at this moment where we also learn how stupid Mr. Litwack is, trying to reinsert the wheel with such force and no care that he somehow manages to break the wheel in half. Like, this shouldn't actually happen at all because the real owner would actually probably care for it and have someone else actually repair if he cannot do it, not risking any chance that it could break and cost him, which he actually does, and causes the catalyst for the events of this film's only happening out of sheer stupidity of each of the film's characters. And when I first saw the reviews of the film, I really think it wasn't going to be this bad because I didn't see it because I didn't trust sequels that much anyway and thought it was going to suck either way. But looking back on it now, even when I first watched it about 3 months ago, I didn't realize it was going to become this bad, because he does something more stupider after this with his own boomer-esque attitude about the internet, where kids pull up their phones with Sugar Rush wheel on eBay, shocked that it costs $200 to buy one when he says something like this.
How much? That's more than this game makes in a year.
I mean, my brother in Christ, you own this arcade. You have enough money to buy this, never mind you're considering how much this machine makes you in an entire year. You have an entire arcade where you must make more money than that, otherwise you'd be broke as shit scrapping for food in this damn arcade with the damn stupid ass referee outfit you are wearing. Plus, maybe these kids want to chip in, maybe their parents are around and ask them if they could provide some change to the arcade that lots of people actually love. Like, why are you automatically going gung-ho into scrapping the game completely, and how it's so convenient that this film made it so the company that made Sugar Rush went out of business years before the events of the film. Like, there are plenty of other sites like Amazon too that could have been used, and it could have just been him to shell out $200 for this product. The kids could have actually pleaded how much they liked the game so he could have bought it and restored it. Everything he does is completely stupid, and this only happens so that they can go on their adventure on the internet. Like, we just moved from Doofus to Doofus where Ralph game jumps during the day, Vanellope indulges in this and betrays the gamer, and 3, Litwack both breaks the wheel and is too broke to buy another wheel, creating a bunch of new homeless characters in the film. And how exactly is no one noticing Ralph on the main screen of Sugar Rush right in front of them, or why these characters are so intent on listening to this conversation as that is something they're not supposed to do? It doesn't make sense, and if one person notices it, it completely ruins everything about these movies and the roles that they're supposed to have. But don't worry, we'll come back to this point later on in the film where everything gets restored, because this is where hell breaks loose. This is where the other characters have to come together to find new homes for these homeless characters, and where Vanellope discusses how she loved the game no matter how much she felt tired of the same courses in the game, how she just wanted to expect something different instead of the same thing, a position that actually Ralph found himself back in Wreck-It Ralph, and something he should understand instead of just recommending ways to be lazy and upholding this relationship he has with a younger girl being so downright creepy and stupid. And of course, after this event, we get to see 90% of the screen time of both Felix and Calhoun together in the entire film, where Ralph goes drinking with Felix to talk about the situation. And I really do have to say, why did they even do this? Why did they virtually remove the other important characters of Wreck-It Ralph for about 1 minute of screen time in the entire film? The thing I hate most about a sequel is the diminished roles that some characters have. Like, it really doesn't make any sense and does a disservice to the characters and the point of a sequel if the main side ones are just relegated to this in order to have this pointless adventure. You are just making the case stronger to why this movie shouldn't exist in the first place, especially the conversation that Felix and Ralph has when he gulps down the root beer to exclaim "Yee boy," where because of Ralph's mishearing of what people have said for some reason in this movie's shallow definition of comedy, he rates "Yee boy" to "E boy" to eBay.
Yeah, boy. Yo, boy. Yeah, boy. eBay.
Why? This movie seemingly does everything wrong from the jokes to the story, which just baffles the mind that this could get positive critical reviews and nominated for an Academy Award. I mean, thank God Spider-Verse came out the same year, or else this actually would have won something. Like, it really doesn't make logical sense why it would come down for this for two video game characters to journey in the internet and buy the fucking wheel. But they do anyway because this movie has to have something to be worth doing, where Litwack actually turns the Wi-Fi on finally, where I'm roughly confused by this again because the beginning and the reaction of the characters except for Sonic, like, did he not have internet back in the original Wreck-It Ralph? Is he just that much of a boomer throughout the 30 years of running this arcade that he never once thought to put up the internet throughout the early 2000s or something? Like, it just really doesn't add up to the real world that this film likes to portray it as. I mean, in this case, I cannot wait for the live action remake too, considering that Moana's announcement came out, where if they can go that far, they can do it again with real actors and ruin the whole point of this too, and this film, because this company is just shallow enough. And actually, why is his name Del here? In the first, it was actually Stan, but they changed it. I mean, why would they do that? Did he just want to change his name between the films for some reason? It doesn't really make any logical sense for this, even though it's a minor detail. It's a minor detail where its name tag actually says something different than what the character was actually named. Even the wiki lists his name as Stan Litwack and not Del Litwack. All I can derive from this scene is that they actually literally forgot about the first film in every single way possible. But I will say, at least in this scene, they have this cool concept about what it's like to travel to the internet when they travel through the wires outside the arcade and into this new megapolis that is the internet, where everything actually gets shitty once again. Because here we get the real product placement schlop of the internet that we know of, like things like Amazon, Snapchat, Fandango, and Goggle, according to Ralph, because they wanted to make him the biggest fool of the internet and misspell or misinterpret every single thing that comes with brand name. Because like, this movie's definition of humor right here is just mispronouncing everything because Ralph is a needy little doofus who is not smart anymore, where they meet Mr. Knowsmore to find out where they need to go. And sure, it might be fun to have these characters, but why do we have them when we actually have Google and the other brands in this film? They are later in the film going to intro us to BuzzTube a little bit later, but here we have YouTube in here and everything else that we know of in real life. Like, why don't they actually just use the more popular ones that everyone knows of? I mean, of course it might have to do with legal issues or something I'm aware of, and the fact that the characters they need to explore, but they have these big brands in the film that we all use and not these fictional ones that they created. Like, why is it hard for them to even think of using that? It doesn't make sense and does a disservice to what they tried to portray the internet as making this movie as real as possible. But of course, then again, that is a minor issue overall because the character is an excuse to put Alan Tudyk back into a Disney film after playing Turbo in the first, where in fact we did not get any mention of at all in this entire film. Like, what they are doing right now is exactly the move that Turbo did in the first that everyone warned about to begin with, and stuff that they fought against, were having him here in this role with no explanation to the past villain that refused to have any villains at all makes zero sense at all, and neither does the scene with eBay to that extent. This is where they fully commit to not understanding the internet, because when they find out that the bid is going for auction on the wheel, they drive up the price from the original ask of $200. This is a scene where both don't know that this requires real money, and because that they are video game characters, they go in and start the bidding process as well. I mean, because they describe it as a man making up numbers next to them, they just go so big, like from $300 to $10,000 to $15,000 and eventually $27,000 for a steering wheel that only costed about $200. And boy, this is the most painful and most dangerous scene in the entire movie that I've ever seen about eBay, encouraging people to bid for things like this 1,000 times more than the asking price because these two do not understand anything about money and made things much more harder than it needed to be. Everything from this point is literally totally stupid when they realize they need money to actually buy that wheel, virtually making it 10 times harder than what Mr. Lickass refused to do to buy a wheel for $200, you cheap old bastard. Like, literally, how does this make any sense in anyone's mind? I know they're video game characters and they're not that smart, but at least they should know temperance and learn anything about money instead of making up random numbers to $27,000. Like, literally, you're setting up wild expectations and just making this random ass idiot on the internet the most happiest person you can imagine because of your own sheer stupidity. Nobody would actually do this. They would not go to this length to just bid straight up to $27,000 $27,000. It doesn't make sense. Like, yes, it's an auction, that can happen, but not to this extent because the other person didn't even go up that high. They probably only went up $100 and they just started screaming arbitrary numbers that didn't even have to exist at this point. Remember, they jumped from 10,000 and doubled that amount each time because they didn't understand the concept of money. And of course, now they only realize they only have 24 hours to come up with that amount of money or forfeit the bid. Where if this movie were to take place in real life on the real internet, they have already lost because there is no way they could be able to make that kind of money again. But then again, this movie disproves that hypothesis otherwise, especially when they go on with the spammers like JP's family, played by Bill Hader, tasking them to steal a car from a battle royale game that one person in Des Moines, Iowa wants. Why? I don't really know. It might have to do with the dark web definition they have in this film and people stealing other IPs for their own nefarious games and stuff. But they do go along with it anyway, where we finally get introduced to another main character in Shank, Gal Gadot's character, who is sort of based on her character from the Fast and Furious franchise because you know the racing elements of this game and the series. And her character is meant where we put her in the same mindset as Vanellope, with the unpredictability of this game usurping the user's role that will influence her decision later on and ruin the whole point of the first movie. And then when they stop them, she suggests that they should instead become a BuzzTube star to go viral and make money that way. Very easy and very simple, except in real life it's not, because YouTube actually also exists in this world, where we make it a big deal that BuzzTube is the premier video sharing site even though YouTube exists. Or like I said before, this is just actually right before TikTok took off, so this thing has no weight to it whatsoever and makes the director's understanding about the internet feel so boomer-esque and so stupid. This is also where Ralph expresses how much he doesn't like Shank because of how Vanellope admires her. The stuff that thinks he will make him lose his kid best friend, which of course everybody loves to see. I'm sure I've actually seen a 30-year-old man interact with a 10-year-old girl, where they then go off to BuzzTube only after they have 8 hours left until it expires on eBay, with the e-boy telling him,
Hello, mister.
Who are you?
I'm your friendly eBay alert messenger.
Huh, an actual e-boy.
I hate this movie, and I hate their definition of e-boy. I mean, internet humor is so trashier, people just like clearly anything by having Ralph with a leaf blower to his face get millions of hearts, where they talk to the head algorithm to discuss to become more famous and get some of that money. I mean, with what we are learning so far, it is very dangerous when it comes to the internet teaching the wrong things like talking to strangers, and as we see with BuzzTube, making thousands of dollars easily with viral videos. Like, it doesn't make any sense if anyone knows from short form content we cannot make that much money, let alone $27,000. You make chump change on TikTok for millions of views, so how the hell does BuzzTube have the ability to have such high CPM and payouts for these type of earnings? It doesn't make sense and goes against the grain with what we know on YouTube, like longer videos actually gets you more money and so forth that we know of on the internet. Which eventually also brings up another issue that they will not mention of all, like taxes and whatnot, which they will totally ignore in this film because this is a kids film and these are characters inside the internet and video game characters, where we don't worry about the IRS and other things that are supposed to come up later in life, because that doesn't make sense to a kid's world. And why is everyone in this office not actually working and watching Ralph videos instead? Like, are you trying to say to kids that offices are fun places to work because we get to watch viral videos all day long? Is this even against company policy? Well, this movie certainly doesn't care about that point because its focus is on the characters of the game world and not real life, where at no point at all anything he does is remotely funny in these people's weird eyes for some reason, or even grounds to be viral enough or large enough for them to like. Like, the whole world just stopped to watch Ralph and do nothing productive just because he could make the money and commit to the plot, just because this stupid ass manager did refuse to buy the wheel for $200. And this is where we see Vanellope want to become a pop-up to see the rest of the internet and whatnot, where Ralph's man-baby issues still continue in this film, where he misdirects Vanellope away from Slaughter Race towards, you guessed it, Disney. And without a doubt, it is the worst scene in the entire movie. Never in the history of Disney have we seen them so shamelessly promote themselves in their own movies to this point where you just know that they are glorifying themselves. Nothing in the scene is relatively important to the entire plot, but is just there to remind you who made this film and who these these characters are owned by. Now of course we don't see them in the scene in the Disney section because this is the world where Disney didn't create them and they are created by different video game companies, but still, it's one that glorifies them because they can and they don't have to put any efforts in their movies at all. And this actually makes the case that this movie should have been released this year since it would celebrate Disney 100 years later instead of releasing it back in 2018 where nothing actually happened. I mean, this is all for the Disney princess scene to take place where everyone loves anyway, to have that valuable lesson to instill into Vanellope's character, who is also a princess but not in the official lineup of Disney princesses. But neither is other big Disney characters for that matter. And I would also like to point out at the end of Wreck-It Ralph, Vanellope renounced the fact she was a princess and did something completely different for Sugar Rush. She in fact stated they were going to become a constitutional democracy, where she actually proclaimed herself as president and not princess anymore, therefore renouncing the fact that she's a princess, so she cannot claim that anymore because she said she's a president. Also, she did not call for a vote to elect the president in the first place, so she is actually the dictator of Sugar Rush and everything she does is actually pretty villainous, so these princesses should actually reject her instead because she's actually an asshole. But yet again, the film does not care about any facts about the first film or anything at all with what they were trying to build, because this is trying to be the most stupidest thing in existence. Like, words cannot express how much I hate this scene and how much they include Anna and Elsa even though they aren't a part of the official lineup, but neither is a few others in that case, where I take issue with the fact that Moana, Mulan, and Pocahontas are a part of that even though they aren't inherently princesses, especially Mulan, who marries a general, not a prince. He isn't even the son of the emperor, he's just a general of the army. Mulan, in this case, is just a warrior who fought for her country and not a royal heiress to the throne of China, Disney, you idiots. Because this scene also does a disservice to another animated film that Disney released, only known as Atlantis. I talked about this in my previous video about why they should remake that as it flopped originally and takes concept better than the rest of their live action films, where in this case they have ignored her existence in official lineups even though her name is Princess Kida. I mean, she is a princess for one, and two, like Elsa, also becomes the queen of her people. Like, ignoring that just makes this company 10 times worse when they sabotage things like Treasure Planet of all things considered. Like, they do not care about this era, and doing this makes me hate them even more. It also makes gross generalizations of character stories like being kidnapped in a slave in the case of Belle and whatnot, where that didn't actually happen to Belle if you actually watch the movie to begin with and understand the plot points of that very film, which these filmmakers refuse to understand. And then this further gets insulted when Rapunzel says something like this.
Do people assume all your problems got solved because a big strong man showed up?
The writers, I learned in this entire film, are complete assholes because apparently while making this, they never understood Tangled or any of the other actions the princess did in the other films. Because if we go back to the original Tangled, both Eugene and Rapunzel worked together. It wasn't the thought of a big strong man that saved the day, because that's not what the story was derived from. It was about two people helping each other to get what they wanted out of life. It's just that these writers never understood when they wrote this, and it's just more towards Disney's shallow attempt at putting social issues in their films when they clearly do not care for them in places like China. You are making Disney princesses assholes in this scene rather than likable female protagonists that we knew of before. I mean, just stop with the shallow feminist bullshit, Disney. These scenes drag everything about these characters down, and I hate it putting the seeds for these modern Disney princesses fanfics. Also, this movie didn't actually need singing either, and makes everything we loved about those musicals even worse when they showed it in this film. It just doesn't make sense for these characters because they didn't need to put it in it, but they did because princesses. Did I actually mention how much I hate this movie? But anyways, moving back to Ralph, it shows how much he forces people to watch his video and makes the money he needs, spending more time sending the wrong messages about the internet where this should not happen, it cannot happen, and you should stop making it happen because you're negatively influencing the public on gross misinformation, or even worse, making this movie more outdated than it needs to be. And do not get me started on that comment section. There's just no way that this man from the first Wreck-It Ralph film is just so hurt by a bunch of negative comments online that aren't even well written like I hate him or just Ralph stinks. These are just comments made by 3-year-olds, and somehow he's affected by it more than the criticism he had in the first film by his own people. Like, why is he such a man baby and so emotionally fragile? Why did the same directors as the first forget everything about his characters? Like, someone as big as Ralph should be open to criticism after the first film, and the fact that many like his content instead of people who hate him most of the time would actually be louder. Like, why do you keep it insisting on being overly stupid movie. Somehow, even after watching it and all the reviews I've already seen about it as being a disaster, this movie just tends to get way more worse than I ever thought to imagine, being the most insanely waste of film that the industry has ever seen. Like, nothing keeps on making sense even if you watch it for the 10th time in a row. And then moving back to Vanellope's case, because of the princesses, she starts to break out in song, one of the worst that Disney has ever made, about the unpredictability of Slaughter Race and the betrayal of everything that the previous movie taught us. Because in this scene, she is going turbo, and this movie never mentioned him once at all, or even explained how the hell she ended back in Slaughter Race this easy with the amount of crap that happened in this sequence. Like, why are you befriending this person you just met when you've known Ralph longer because you're just tired of everything being the same? All under the fact that you actually loved your game. This isn't your game or your world, and adding her does not make any logical sense within the game's design. Even though her company might not exist anymore, this still wouldn't mean it would be grounds for a lawsuit or something, with various video game characters from different properties ending up without anyone noticing it. This character, even though she was missing, was re-added to the game as Sugar Rush and became popular, and anyone who knows Sugar Rush and her character's existence is going to wonder why she is in this game that is designed to be more realistic. Like, what is going to happen when they stop updating the game or whatever? This is a battle royale that won't last forever, as we have seen in the past, because trust me, compared to Sugar Rush like Mario Kart in such cases, that can last a lot longer in the sphere of online games. This right here, actually, Vanellope, cemented your death, you illiterate piece of shit, where I will always revel in your supposed death in the original game because of how stupid you fucking are. It's like, not only did they forget about the villain in the first, they just forget they actually had villains at all, where the main protagonists of this very film are those very villains instead. Because we see here that Ralph hates losing Vanellope because of his own insecurities, and Ghost gets a virus to stop that and help her come back to him, which in fact he almost destroys his game and ruins her dream about this game and whatnot, going on this tirade because it's not what friends do, and just making everything based on gross misunderstandings and not giving people a time to explain anything, causing him to become the new virus because of his stupid insecurities. I am trying so hard to be more simple about this movie, subtracting some elements and whatnot, but it's just so insanely stupid. Like, how honestly did they actually think that this was a good idea for a sequel compared to the other things that they actually have in the past? So indirectly responsible for everything, the entire internet suffers a global DDoS attack with its own clones trying to trace after Vanellope, and by extent dooming the entire World Wide Web, causing this mass confusion for this virus that came out of nowhere just hours after the internet was broken because of Ralph's viral BuzzTube videos. Where you start to notice they aren't going to open up any investigation at all to why these videos exist and why there's no definable creator for such things and why such a virus like this existed in the first place. Like, everything it just shows you is stupid about the internet and it doesn't make sense. But after all this terrible sequence that makes Ralph the villain, it's just to show that he's apologized for his actions and not realizing what Vanellope wanted out of her life and letting go of his insecurities and the need to something he already resolved at the end of the first film. I mean, why are these characters getting scot-free for most of the consequences and clinginess that the film wants, forgetting everything that happened as quickly as it disappeared? Like, it doesn't make sense at all, and it actually ends with the princesses saving Ralph once again.
Look up there! It's a big, strong man in need of rescuing.
Oh my god, could you just stop with this bullshit? Why are you making her say this? You are just diluting the point with this passive-aggressive bullshit, and the plan is just too elaborate to make any sense, and I really hate it. You're not learning anything from these previous characters, and you're just making them worse than they need to be. But of course, it's not as much as the next scene, of course, where the two agree that Vanellope can go off the Slaughter Race. Like, why are you doing this, Ralph? Why are you agreeing her to go turbo, you doofus? And how the hell does Shank have the power to program her into the very game? She is only just a character of the game and not a developer. I mean, what is wrong with this movie? You don't make it clear that any character can deliberately change the code of games just to make it so that other video game characters can join in, you idiot. I mean, she also says that Ralph can join in and they can actually code him in, because why the hell not? He went turbo before and almost doomed everything to his game, which should have actually happened to Sugar Rush because people would actually notice she isn't there anymore once he returns to the arcade, I guess. It just doesn't make sense, and the developers of the game will not actually make any sense of it, like their game coded a new character without them knowing. I'm pretty sure video game developers would actually know what exactly is happening and the characters are in the game, and now she's in the game she's not supposed to be a part of, and anyone who notices this is going to freak out and it's going to cause mass lawsuits. This is stupid. Like, the next scene we see is that the wheel is back in Sugar Rush and the game is virtually fixed, which doesn't actually explain anything asking how this happened, referring back to earlier points I actually said, where did it actually just show up on Litwak's doorstep as a gift that's surprised that he has the wheel back to repair it? And once again, isn't anyone just going to notice that Vanellope is gone from the game and virtually going to get destroyed again? Like the logic back from the previous movie? Like everyone has the brain of a walnut in this entire film, like it just doesn't make sense. It's just so unbelievably stupid on all levels of an unenjoyment.
Even though we got that steering wheel and saved Sugar Rush, it's never really gonna be the same.
Yes, Ralph, the game is not going to be same because the most popular character in this very game is not there and is on the game she isn't supposed to be on. Her design does not match the game, you idiot. Somebody is going to be involved in a lawsuit and the developers will not know how this even happened. Actually, now that I think about it, what happened during the time on the internet? Was the arcade actually closed during the daytime during this time? Because they were there on the daytime during the internet. I mean, we don't know, they just game jumped so many times, so I don't know about that part. Nothing actually makes sense anymore, forgetting anything about the original and virtually returning us to the characters of the first film who were absent from this horrid adventure. And I'm pretty sure Serge in this scene would have been angry at the fact that both Ralph and Vanellope went to the internet and knowing she is actually not part of the arcade anymore in a game she does not belong in. This is a case where I believe Shank is the real villain of the film in that regard, becoming a friend to Vanellope too quick, too fast, and making her go turbo from her original game. And the ending itself is really horrendous. You know, the scene where he actually feeds too much pancakes and by extent shocks the kid in pure horror? This is where I actually like to point out the references they used to using Baby Moana in this film. Used as a reference to the whole movie and the scene as a trailer. I just really hate this because it shows how stagnating the animation they are is using by reusing the same character models, like Elsa's mother is just basically Elsa and Baby Moana is just that same character in this very film, where I just think they need to branch out from that style where others are just doing too much different, and this is going to cause the same stupid stagnating problems that Disney has faced. And that the fact that these two themselves are more assholes than I could ever imagine, shocking a kid and making this car stop in the middle of the road. I mean, seriously, fuck these two. In fact, let's just play this scene again to remind you how much I hate this movie. I want Vanellope to burn in hell, and Ralph for that matter too, because of how stupid they are during the course of this movie. This movie is literally the worst sequel of all time. It is so gross and it destroys the original, where they had the right concepts of expanding into the digital age, but used it in the worst ways possible, making the two films so different and separate from each other that doesn't actually make sense at all. Every character in this film is just so terrible that it would have been better to watch paint dry than to watch any of them at all. The world itself does not question the weird aspects of what Ralph did or anything that happened during the same day, including the viral videos he made, a virus that actually had his character, and a person who spends $27,000 on a wheel that should have actually costed them $200, which would have been the most oddest conspiracy that the planet has ever faced that no one actually failed to recognize. It's at this point where I cannot believe, no matter how hard I tried to simplify it, how utterly bad the movie actually is, exemplifying Disney's inability to create sequels or good original content that is just so derived from itself. It's just that this movie is a shameful self-promotion fest that shows the downward trend that this company has been on without any respects to animation anymore. This is a movie that is straight up written by their villains instead, because there are just traits that the good guys don't actually explore at all, teaching the most outlandish, dangerous decisions of the internet and highly disrespectful to its own source material. And of course, actually how painfully unfunny that the movie actually ended up being. Like, out of the entire film, I did not laugh at all from a single moment that they tried to be funny, and I actually think it's more funny to laugh at a guy who laughs at cars for no other reason but the fact that the car is on a screen. Like, it really does not make any sense, and Disney, you are really shameful for doing any of this. And I'm not gonna say sequels are bad, because Puss actually proved something greater than the original and was a good time, but in the case of Disney, they just didn't know how to do that, and I hate them for it. Like, after this, we get mediocre sequels after mediocre sequels, where they are the main villains of the film, and now it's hard to see them recover from these very facts. But with that said, Ralph Breaks the Internet really did wreck everything important about a movie, and how sequels don't always work and can fail miserably despite being positively reviews. And with that all said, I'm all done, so goodbye.